So,
we have a question. There's something coming in.
Let's hear it.
So, the question is, might be easy. Question is, how you visualize tactics?
Tactics?
Yes. So, if you have an, I don't know, company or whatever, and you like to visualize your tactics situations. So, how you do this? Do you do this on a board? Do you do this digital? I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, so I think that's actually a tough one. So the question is, do you actually want to visualize tactics, or do you prefer to visualize the positions, right? So if you think of a computer game or a war movie or whatever, you have a bird's eye perspective at some point of time, and you see the Roman legions standing there and waiting to clash with the enemy. And I think you have to have that bird's eye view first of like what's the position of the players of the units, and then that's the foundation for actually developing tactics. So I think that's, first of all, that's a very good question, because a lot of people don't like draw the picture for themselves. So I think that's something that's not really being talked about. So I'm sure there's, if you Google it, there's going to be a lot of systems that actually deal with political positions and strategic positions. But as with a lot of leadership topics, nobody actually ever tells you that, right? So either you know it or you don't know it.
Correct.
And then, sure, if you're lucky, maybe you have done a degree in university that had something. Yeah, so you're a developer, so you probably didn't have it. But right, if you do political science, or maybe you did business strategy, and you at least have some inkling of what you might be able to do. So I think it's very important to actually realize that there is such a thing. You can kind of draw a map of what's going on. I personally wouldn't draw the tactics. I would draw the positions, or like, first of all, I would identify the players, right? So who's actually in this situation? And there's different systems, and in the agile world, systems thinking is a big part, right? So that's not necessarily really like a political influence map or anything like that, but you try to look at the whole system as a whole and look at the interrelation between the different parts. And you can just do that for political players in different situations and then like kind of map that out. I always want to say, because politics has often has a bad name, and I think that might be culturally contextual, but so, you know, when we're talking about political stuff, people often think about like Machiavellian evils, you know, evil plans are best. But the fact of the matter is that in leadership and in Scrum, like almost everything is political, right? If you don't know how to play the game, you are going to lose. And so for me, it didn't come naturally. I didn't like it, and at some level I still don't like it. But in the end, if you want your team to win, you know, if you want to achieve the mission, one of you on your team better have some political skills.
Hopefully.
Yes, and ideally it's the product owner, and he or she is so fit at it that you don't even have to worry about it. But maybe they aren't, and at the same time, it's always good to have like more than one person being capable at it, right? And so I think the difference is like how you actually use that skill. You know, you can use it in that mean-spirited way. You're just destroying, playing a zero-sum game where you're just taking stuff away from other people. But you can actually try to achieve good missions, right? If you're politically smart, you can actually achieve good stuff. So it's kind of like a weapon, right? So you can use it for good and for bad. And you know, if I'm in trouble and a policeman comes to help me, I kind of like to have him have a gun, right? So I don't want him to be completely helpless and we're just two people becoming the victims maybe of a crime. So I sometimes want good people to have the right weapons, and politics is such a weapon. So what I would do is I would first try to identify who are the players in this situation, right? And most often than not, these situations tend to be stable over a time. So you can always do it ad hoc, but usually you are in a setting, in a corporation, in a sports team or whatever. So you have a set number of players, and I would just write them down on a piece of paper. And be very careful with that piece of paper. Nobody can ever see that, right? So it's not only that they that they could kind of almost read your mind when they see it. Just the fact of somebody seeing you do this is a very bad sign, because then they're exactly going to assign this. Yeah, oh, he's scheming. He has his evil plans ready, right? And so even though you might have the best intentions and you're just trying to protect a coworker, for example, and you realize, well, this is actually a political situation. Maybe I need to think about this before I start running around and talking to executives. Maybe let's just step back and do that. So you might have the best intentions, but people will just assume, if they see this piece of paper from you, that you're evil. And so I think this is one of the other reasons why you rarely see that out in the world, because those managers that are successful, they either keep it hidden or they just do it in their mind, right? So the fact that you put it on paper should be a transitory stage, and at some point of time you should just have done it so often that it's in your mind and you can just arrange this.
Correct. But sometimes it's getting complex, right? So then you have to visualize something, because then you're in you have a call or whatever, and you like to see where are your players. So to decide is it right or is it wrong? Do you should get left or get right? I don't know, whatever.
Yes, exactly. And I think once you have that, it's important, because we're talking about system thinking just as a parallel. The important part is not zooming in on the players and analyzing everything about them, even though you kind of want to do that to a certain degree. You want to look at the relationships between the parts, right? So you want to know who's actually allied with whom, who likes each other, who hates each other,
who's supporting someone, I don't know.
Yes. And as always, we want to go deeper. We want to do the root cause analysis. Why are they actually allied? What's the reason? Is it because they want to make more sales? Is it because they just hate the guts of the other person? What's actually behind that? Because once you know that, then you're actually in a position to influence that, right? So if you know, well, this person thinks if they are allying with a third party, then they meet their sales targets, for example. Maybe there's a way that you can provide them with the sales success that they need, and you can break up that alliance. And actually in Sun Tzu, the first and one of the best strategists, like one of his first points is break up the enemy's alliances, right? Because it is really shitty to be fighting all alone, right? So it's important to know why people are allied, why they are enemies, dig deeper, and it's very... I think this kind of map is just a starting point to actually dig deep to find out what's going on, what's the maybe psychological, maybe political, maybe emotional reason for people acting the way they do, and having the relationships. And as always, and this is a very psychological view, but always listen to the language of people, right? Because language, we can't look into the brains. That's kind of starting with neuroscience, neuroimaging. It's kind of starting to change, but we're not on a high level yet. And because the brain is just such a black box, such a mystery. And like the little stuff that we can see right now, it's influencing everything and it's changing everything, right? But we're still at a very early level. It's early days in that regard. But language almost always betrays the thought, right? So, and that's why you have talk therapy, for example, because the language is a medium that you can influence and work with and read. So always listen to the language that people are using, especially if it's like overtly aggressive. It's kind of deviating from the norm. So it's very, you notice an intimacy of people when they're talking. Well, maybe they have a common history, and where you can hear a sharpness in there. So dig deeper into that and notice it if somebody uses special words or derogatory terms for someone else, and try to get into that. And also kind of notice their little triggers, right? So I think it was yesterday or the day before, we were talking on the phone, and I was considering buying a curved monitor for the first time. So not a flat screen for my PC, but one that's curved inside. And you said something, and I asked you about it, and you said, well, I don't really know, it's blah, 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 blah. And then you said, but I'm too old for that. I'm too old school for that kind of stuff. And people have to know that I'm how old are you?
Yeah, 30.
30. So I'm 12. I've got 12 years on you. And the minute you said that you're too old for it, so you don't care about it because you're still young. But I'm older, so for me, I have to stay relevant. So the minute you said that, I hit the buy now button on Amazon and I didn't even listen to the rest of what you were saying, right?
Great.
So
You're doing good.
because I was thinking, no, I can't get this complacent. I can't become this so outdated. Because let's be honest, I'm older than you, but I'm only 42. So I'm probably going to be 70 years old. If I start like losing the ball right now, if I'm falling behind the curve now, what's going to happen in 10 years or 20 years? If I start lagging now, I'm going to be in really deep trouble pretty soon. I can't do that. So I have to stay on it. And if people are using curved screens, even though I don't understand what's going on, I'm going to do it because, right? And so this is something that not everyone does. And you couldn't see it because we were on the phone. But if I were to notice something like this, well, you kind of know how to get me now, right? You just have to frame it in a way that makes me look old, and suddenly I'm doing your bidding, right? And I'm exaggerating, right? But people have these kind of triggers. So if I notice something, I don't have a piece of paper, but I remember it, right? So, or everything that is kind of out of the norm, that people react very positively towards something or very negatively. So, for example, some people might get triggered by feeling used by someone else, right? So I just make a mental note of that. And none of this, and I know that when I say it and look at your face, it sounds so calculating, but it's actually not, right? I just try to notice what's going on around me, right? So someone else looks at nature and notices, well, this little bird has like a red front area or something, right? So they're very acute into seeing what's going on in nature. And I think in our jobs, if you're a leader, it's paramount that you are attuned to what's going on emotionally, psychologically with people, what's going on politically. And so that's something that I try to make note of. And one last thing. So if you have this map, you kind of know what people want, how they could relate to each other, how they are triggered, for example, in a positive and a negative way. Almost always, because we're not living in wartime, right? So it's not that often that we really have zero-sum games, right? If I gain something and you lose something, people always act like it, but that's not really the truth, right? A lot of the limitations are just in our mind. We live in such abundant times, and this will change at some point of time. But right now, it's there's such abundancy that we can all prosper at the same time. And actually, if we help each other, I think that everyone is going to be better off. And so one of the main tools that I use when I have this map in my head is I try to align people better that weren't aligned, because often there's some form of misunderstanding between the parties. They are not seeing the whole picture, because a lot of people aren't doing this mapping, right? So they're just reacting. They're just, like driving in the blind, they're driving in the fog, they don't have the lights turned on, and they just react. They don't know what's going on. But as soon as you have this clarity, often you can see what the others aren't seeing. And then you can ask them, for example, well, did you realize that this other party, they're actually providing you with something very beneficial, that if you guys keep on fighting, you're going to be in trouble yourself. And isn't there a way that we can maybe align you two guys better by doing something, right? And so actually, I think you can take this to the dark side, so to speak, but actually this gives you a way to see what other people aren't, and then use it in a light way to make people align themselves better and understand each other better.
Great.
So one aspect to also keep in mind once you have mapped out the players is to actually look at how influential are they, right? So maybe if you draw little bubbles with the names of the persons or the departments or whatever, maybe indicate how much strength there is in their influence, because it's not going to be the same in all directions, right? So you might have a person let's even have a CEO of a company, and he or she is obviously very influential, but that doesn't mean that they can impose their will to every nook and cranny of the organization, right? So they generally have a lot of force coming out of them, so you might draw thick arrows coming out of their little area on your map. But it's really important to nuance it and to see who has influence in what situation over whom. So I think I would also address the strength of their influence. And also a very important part of it is, what's your relationship to them, right? Because this map at this point is somewhat neutral, but if you want to influence somebody, you got to have a relationship, right? So if they already hate your guts, well, maybe if you need them, that's going to become difficult, right? And as in many things, the rule is dig your well before you're thirsty. If you need to dig a well and you're already dying of thirst, well, it's going to be too late, right? So build the foundation, the relationship that you can then later go on and ask them about something, ask for something. You need to do that well ahead of time. And this is super calculating, right? But if you want to help make your team succeed, then you need to map everything out in the beginning, and then you need to identify who is going to be necessary at some point of time. And maybe you don't like that person, and that's your choice. And then you can decide to not build the relationship with the person, but that might also mean that you will need that person later on, or actually your team needs it. And you didn't build the relationship. And suddenly you can't deploy your systems, or you can't get the inputs that you need.
Yeah, correct.
You can't hire a new team member, even though you guys are doing overtime. And then you're going to feel the pain. And even worse, at that point, it's going to be obvious to everybody that you need that person's help, and suddenly you're sucking up to him, right? And it's too late, and it's even more unlikely that you're going to do it then, right? So it's really advantageous to have that map on paper or in your mind and see, well, who do I actually need to have a relationship, because then you can build it before you need it, and it's not that obvious. Check. So remember, nothing changes until you do.
Correct.
But the good news is you are ready.
Cool.
All right. Peace out.